Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the world's most exciting classroom. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. It has been a little while since I have said that. The last 3 weeks, I have been out in the Cape Town area in South Africa, catching up with the team as we were spending a little time out there for a large variety of reasons. We had 10 young Darwin leaders join us over a couple weeks and work on live projects in the field with conservation experts, learning new skills, creating new videos and media content. Let's see, what did we have? We had sharks, we had Cape vultures, we had African penguins, and a whole nother series of really exciting projects. And as the weeks go by, we'll have new videos to share with you, and we'll have some of those young Darwin leaders join us in some of our world's most exciting classroom events. I spent a week or so in the Greater Kruger area, so out in the field chasing lions and leopards and wild dogs. It was a lot of fun. I'm going to share a few of those pictures and videos later on in today's live lesson. The ship has recently set sail, so we are no longer in Cape Town. I'm going to share a map here. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And let's see what's going on. So yeah, for about 3 weeks or so, you would have seen us hanging out right here in Cape Town. There was a little trip where we went around the Cape, and we were in Simonstown where we had some special events. We also unveiled a bust of Charles Darwin in the harbor area of Simonstown. So if you ever visit, you can see this beautiful bronze bust of Charles Darwin that is now there and being displayed in the harbor region. And then eventually we had to say goodbye to South Africa and Cape Town. We're several days into our sailing. You can see we're here now along the coast. And within a week or so, we'll probably reach St. Helena, which will be our next stop. We'll have some more Darwin leaders. We're going to try a really, really special event from St. Helena. I'm not going to say anything yet to ruin the surprise, but shortly we'll announce a pretty cool live event we're going to do from St. Helena. Again, like I said, we'll have our young Darwin leaders, and we'll be there for probably about a week or so. We're not going to have a live connection with the ship today because, unfortunately, the Starlink unit is down. We've been trying to work with tech support for a couple days to get it back up and running. And I'm hoping that sometime today we'll be able to solve that issue and we'll have our connection back established with the Darwin200 team and crew on the Oosterschelde, because it is important that they're able to send back data and things like that. We really need that strong connectivity. But Tom, one of our camera operators who was on board in Cape Town, but he's not on board right now, he sent me a little video clip from our return to Cape Town from Simonstown. So it's kind of a really cool little clip. I want to play it here for you now. Just bear with me for a second while the video loads up, and we should see the arrival video now. All right, so I'll just talk over it a little bit. We don't have any sound on it, but they were in a little dinghy waiting for the ship to arrive. So we've got some beautiful shots of some of these dolphins swimming along the coast. You can see some young ones there, little babies next to them as well. And then there we go. There's that iconic, you can see Signal Hill in front, and then the iconic Table Mountain there in the background, and some of that cityscape of Cape Town. And then there we go. The ship came into view. It was quite a long day of sailing. You can see the sun's just starting to go down, but they did have good winds, so they were able to use the sails for most of the journey around the Cape from Simonstown back to Cape Town. And so we'll just enjoy a few of these shots of the Oosterschelde making its way back to the harbor after a full day of sailing to get from Simonstown back to Cape Town. All right, there we go. Catching a little bit of those last rays of sun there on Table Mountain. Sails are all put away in this shot. They're all stowed away. So we're on motor now because obviously it's a little bit easier to get into the harbor and maneuver up to our berth when we're using the motor. And so there's some final shots there as they're kind of tucking those sails away. We've got that beautiful last light of the day. Some really incredible sunsets in Cape Town and out in the bush, out in the Greater Kruger area as well. All right, there we go. So let's get into this live event action. We have a guest speaker joining us right now. She's hiding out backstage. We have Hailey Shchepanik joining us. She's a marine researcher. She was our Explorers Club researcher on board the leg from Sydney, so Sydney, Australia, to Hobart in Tasmania. And I should also mention as well that Hailey is currently working as a dive safety officer at the Vancouver Aquarium. So, and I saw her this weekend or last weekend in New York at the Explorers Club annual dinner. So it's nice to catch up with her there. Let's bring Hailey in from backstage right now. Hi, Hailey. How are you?
Hey, doing well, Joe. How are you?
Good, good. It's great to have you with us today. I know it's early on the West Coast, so thanks for getting up for us.
And no problem. At least the sun's out these days.
Yeah, perfect. That is a nice benefit of winter fading into the rear view. Well, Hailey, it's great to have you with us. We're excited today to learn a little bit more about your time with the ship in pretty much one of my favorite places on the planet, Australia. So we'll let you take over for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my first time there, and it definitely did not disappoint.
All right, perfect. I'm going to pop your presentation into the event. I still have it here backstage. I have to stop this one and this one. There we go. All right, Hailey, we're ready for you.
All right. So hello, everyone. As Joe mentioned, my name is Hailey Shchepanik, and my background is in marine biology. So I work as a researcher, I work as an expedition scuba diver, and I also work as a diving safety officer. Today, I'm here to tell you all about my time aboard the DARWIN200 global voyage, where I joined as a visiting scientist for the Explorers Club. Here you can see a picture of me on one of our very first days on the ship, holding one of the Explorers Club flags that I'll tell you more about towards the end of the presentation. So Joe provided an excellent overview of where the ship is now. When I was on the ship, it was earlier in its voyage, earlier in its multi-year voyage, and as he mentioned, part of our aim was to conduct global research projects, including on the topics of coral reefs, marine debris, marine mammals, and seabirds, as well as engage our Darwin leaders, so the youth, the high school students or university students at each of the ports that we visited, as well as create educational outreach, like the presentation that you're listening to today. And I wanted to circle here the leg that I was able to join. So as I mentioned, this was my very first time traveling to Australia, but luckily, the research that I work on is the global concept. So I'll tell you about that now. So the project that I was on the ship to work on, I call Sneaky Hitchhikers, How Trash Helps Invaders Travel the Oceans. So I was exploring how hitchhiking marine species use trash to travel our oceans, and I was using a specific technology called environmental DNA. And this is a tool that, again, I'll tell you more about in a few slides, that we can use to track how marine debris is helping spread invasive species throughout our oceans. If you can imagine the life of a cup or a plastic bottle in our oceans, it doesn't just stay where it enters the ocean. It can travel the whole entire world. So take a minute to think about the different types of marine debris. In this photo, you can see perhaps like a plastic cup, we have plastic wrappers, we have nets, we have fishing gear. And all of these things have a really long lifespan, and you can imagine that they stay in the ocean for really long times before they start breaking down and turning into microplastics. And while these objects are floating around in our oceans, especially the open ocean, like the areas that we were sailing with on the Darwin 200, these items can make actually really good homes for different types of marine life as they float around. And so think to yourself for a second, what kind of animals might live on these pieces of marine debris? Think about things that maybe grow on these pieces of debris, or maybe even they use this debris as shelter to hide from, the sun or to hide from predators. So here are a couple photos of things that you might see growing on marine debris in the ocean. You can see in the top part, we have things like barnacles, we have things like clams. Over in the bottom, you can see things like snails or sea stars. And all of these things are now living in the ocean where they don't occur naturally. So usually they wouldn't live here because they need some sort of substrate or some sort of habitat to grow on. And this is one of the functions that marine debris plays in our oceans. in addition to causing pollution, so transferring species places that they don't usually go. Another interesting example is the fact that fish can use this debris as habitat as well. So if you ever see, a floating patch of debris, there may very well be fish underneath using it as shelter, or even a place to lay eggs or to gather. So trash can carry things new places by providing habitat, essentially, where places where it's not naturally found. And these species can travel a long way from home to places that they wouldn't be able to travel on their own, into areas they would not usually survive. And what I'm trying to say here in a nutshell is this can be a really big vector for invasive species in our ocean. And we're just now beginning to understand more and more the role of marine debris in the spread of invasive species. So I thought I'd share a couple of photos of well-known marine invasive species. And maybe you've seen some of these before, like the lionfish, which is an invasive in the Caribbean, and it actually was first introduced there after someone released it from an aquarium. Then we have the European green crab that came over in shipping. We have the crown of thorns starfish, and also things like Asian carp. And invasive species, like I said, are becoming more and more prevalent in our world as we start moving around more quickly and shipping and all those things. And ultimately, they can have large impacts into our ecosystems. These animals become really prevalent. They become a predator. They might spread disease. And overall, they can really change our ecosystem. And these might be some lesser known examples, but these are examples of marine invasive species that have been spread to different countries, to different continents by marine debris already. And this usually happens when a storm, say like a tsunami, comes in and perhaps disrupts the environment and sends a bunch of debris into the ocean, and therefore it travels across. However, it's often hard to see invasive species with our eyes before they become a problem. So that's where my work comes in, and that's what I was doing on the DARWIN200. I was using a tool called environmental DNA. And if you haven't already heard of it, it's a way that we can detect species without actually having to see them. Because when we're on the DARWIN200 expedition, we're sailing the whole time. We're not able to jump in the water with our snorkel or anything. The environmental DNA is the perfect tool for this job. So basically, if you think everything you touch in your classroom gets a little bit of your DNA on it, the same goes for everything living in the ocean. The ocean is full of DNA from everything that lives there, including things like fish, like crabs, like sharks, like whales. As these animals pass through their environment, they are shedding skin cells, they're shedding mucus, they're shedding scales. So if you think about that, the fact that all the DNA is contained in the ocean of everything that lives there, if we take a scoop of water from that location and do some analysis in the lab, we can learn a lot about the animals that live there. And specifically, we can learn about the animals that are too small to see with our eyes. So here are some photos from my time on the Oosterschelde, and I'll start from left to right. So left, you can see me using the bucket of science, and basically I would throw the bucket overboard on a rope, catch some water, and then move on to my next stage. And it's really important that we sanitize this bucket between each collection so that we're not contaminating the water and we're not contaminating our sample. So then I would pull the bucket up, often with the help of other shipmates on the boat, and pull it up and start filtering it. If you look in the very middle, you can see me holding a syringe and wearing my gloves. And this was because I was pushing all the water through a tiny filter like this. So I'm pushing the water through the filter, and in here is what's collecting all the DNA. So this is all I need to take back to the lab to start my analysis. I put about a liter or two of water, and this gives us a really good snapshot of all the animals that were present in that water sample that I took. And on the right, you can see a picture of me in the lab. This is when we crack open this filter, we cut it up into little bitty pieces, and we start adding different chemicals to take out the DNA and then to understand what animals are present in the sample. So that work is still ongoing because I was just on the ship in November, and sometimes these things take a couple months to do. We need to process it in the lab, and then we need to process it on our computer, where we take the information we get in the lab, and we have to do a bit of like a matching game, like a puzzle, where we take the DNA strands that we detected and match them to DNA strands of known animals. And here's just like a quick little video from the ship. You can see me screwing on that filter I just held up onto the syringe and pressing the water through the filter. This was one of the relatively calm days. It definitely wasn't this easy every single day. Sometimes with the water splashing all over. You can see I'm wearing my rubber boots and my rain pants. But we were lucky this day with really good weather, and I was able to get all my samples. I did this 3 times a day in order to get like an evenly spaced sampling, again, to try and understand invasive species. However, I mentioned, of course, the role of marine debris in this as well. So every hour I would go out and we'd scan for marine debris. Everyone on the ship was helping me look out with binoculars or look out with their eyes. However, we weren't encountering a lot of marine debris, which was really great. So instead of sampling marine debris while we were doing our sailing, I did some surveys while we were at ports, because this is an area where marine debris tends to accumulate and they settle and things tend to grow. So while we were in Sydney and while we were in Hobart, I did a survey for marine debris as well, taking photos of any organisms that we found. So environmental DNA, like I said, can be really good for studying invasive species, but it can also be good for other things, like taking a large snapshot of everything that is found in our oceans, studying animals that hide, just kind of like I said, animals that we don't really see with our eyes, and also studying invasive or endangered species like sea turtles, for example, because instead of having to actually go to the animal and sample them and interact with them, we can just take a water sample and we'll get a lot of information without having to disturb the animals in their natural behavior. So the results from the study, like I said, are still ongoing, and I will be really excited to share it with the DARWIN200 team when they're done. But there are already so many scientists working together around our oceans, and that's why the DARWIN200 was a really excellent opportunity to be able to take samples all over the globe from environmental DNA and help out a lot of different scientists asking a lot of different questions. And we'll put this data in global databases, and this will help scientists in the future as well. So life on board the ship, it wasn't all sampling and filtering. I had a lot of different roles when I was there, and that's one of the best parts about it. So like I said, this was my first time to Australia, but it was also my first time on a sailing vessel. So each of us took turns as crew, which meant we sometimes had to be up in the middle of the night because someone had to be watching at all times and someone had to be steering the boat at all times. So you can see a picture of me steering. In the middle, you can see a picture of one of our other shipmates giving a presentation. This is really cool because I was there to do research and educate others, but also was able to listen to presentations by others as well. And this is someone who actually is an expert in historical maps. So he was able to tell us all about the history of exploration in the regions that we were sailing, which I thought was really cool. He brought us maps from the earliest explorers, and I thought it really, really was an amazing experience on the DARWIN200. And of course, 3 times a day, I would also do my sampling. And a few more videos from our time. You can see us, everything was a team effort. There's no way to do this alone. You can see us pulling and pulling and pulling on the sails. We also had some friendly visitors in the sun as we got into Hobart. You can see, wait for it. Little dolphins were such a welcome guest. It felt like a welcome party as we were coming back into port. And the sun came out, and we saw land after 7 days, and taking in the view while I take the last of my samples. So in a nutshell, the research on board that I did is still a work in progress, and it's part of larger projects that I do with different university collaborators all over the world. And like true explorers, we were given a couple of flags to hold during our expedition. And many of these flags have been all over the world, and in some cases, they've even been to the moon. You can see on the left is the WINGS flag, and this is an organization that funds women in expedition science. So they were able to give me a small grant to help do my work on this project. And on the right, you can see this was my team. So this is the shift that I work on, the people that I worked on with the different shifts, morning, evening, and night. And we're holding the Canadian chapter flag of the Explorers Club, which I got to take on the expedition with me and has also been on many expeditions before. And then finally, here's a picture of me back on land, and I was really happy because we were able to get all the samples that I wanted to understand how trash carries species, including invasive species, all over the world. And just one of the kind of takeaways that I wanted to leave with you today is think about your own self as you're, maybe you're traveling, you're walking on a beach at your national park. When we think about invasive species, we want to try not to bring things from one place to another. So one thing that I do when I'm exploring our natural places like parks and different trails is I try to take photos of shells and rocks and plants and anything I find that is interesting, and I'll keep them in an album instead of taking them home with me to collect and potentially transport invasive species in our world. So that in a nutshell is what I did for the Darwin 200. As Joe mentioned, I'm a diving safety officer in my daily life when I'm not on expedition. And this means I get to go to some really interesting places. This is actually a couple pictures from my time with the National Park Service in the US, where I worked as a scientific diver. And we do all sorts of different jobs underwater, from counting corals to surveying shipwrecks or vacuuming bugs off rocks to try and understand what our environment looks like. I also said I worked as an expedition scuba diver, and this is in conjunction with my work as a naturalist. So sometimes I get to go out into the world and lead people on hikes, telling them all about the biodiversity and the history of an area. And lastly, my role as a diving safety officer. You might be saying, what's that? And it's a term that I didn't know until a couple years ago. And it basically means the person that gets to be the expert in scientific diving at an organization. You get to train all of the scientific divers and different scientists and really help them gain the skills that they need to explore our oceans. It's a job that I absolutely love, and I'm really happy that over time I was able to get scuba diving experience and end up in this role. So if you're ever curious about our oceans, I started out as a lifeguard, someone who took a lot of swimming lessons, eventually got into snorkeling, and then scuba diving. And then now it's led me here to this really wonderful role. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope maybe you have some questions about environmental DNA, marine debris, and invasive species that I'd be happy to help answer. Thank you.
All right, Hailey, thanks for a great presentation. It looks like you had an absolutely great time on board of the ship. The crew's great, so I'm sure you had lots of fun with them as well. And yeah, Sydney to Tasmania are, not a bad leg to join and not a bad spot to spend a little bit of time in each of those cities and locations. Very cool. Okay, well, to those who are tuning in, don't be shy. Use the chat sidebar. You can send us in a few questions. But to get us started, Hailey, I want to ask you a little bit about edNA in the water. Is there kind of an optimal length of time? After a certain amount of time passes, can you no longer, get a good sample of what had been there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that's kind of been the focus of many researchers. They've shifted their focus to actually understanding how long this DNA is going to last in our water to be able to understand when we can detect things. So as a general, there's no general rule of thumb. It's going to depend on the animal. So say something like a whale is going to shed a lot more DNA, so perhaps we can detect it for a longer period of time. And there's also a lot of different variables that will influence how long DNA lasts in the water. So you can get ancient DNA that lasts hundreds and hundreds of years in the right conditions, but if your DNA is exposed to a lot of sunlight or a lot of wave energy, different chemicals, different temperatures, that can affect how quickly the DNA breaks down into little small pieces, and then we won't be able to detect it. So I've seen studies where DNA can persist for at least a week, 2 weeks in an area, but for more mobile species, And for areas with more tide and more wind, it's going to disperse more quickly. So a general rule of thumb is always to, not just take one sample. We're going to take 3 samples at a time, and we're going to take samples at different, spaced out at different lengths to try to account for the fact that, DNA, we don't actually know exactly how long DNA might persist or DNA might stick around in our samples.
Okay. I've got a couple questions here for you. How many samples did you take in total, and was it challenging to get them home?
Yeah, so we took 30 samples in total. So we had 7 days. And logistically, it's very easy, right? It's very small, which is why we use environmental DNA. And there are also, of course, when you're studying invasive species, a lot of strict rules. You can't just bring samples all over the place because you're bringing invasive species all over the place. You need permits, you need all of those things. So in my other work, I've done samples where, you take an actual animal. But since here we just have the DNA kind of locked away in our samples, I was able to get the appropriate permissions to take this back home. So this is one of the reasons why we used edNA on this project, is because we didn't require electricity to take the samples, we didn't require a fridge to preserve the samples, and it's nice and portable. And again, it was the fact that we just had to take a bucket and a scoop of water, which really takes just a couple seconds over the side of the ship, made it really easy for us to conduct our work in kind of like any weather, as long as it was safe to go on deck.
All right. Alexis would like to know, what is your favorite part of your job?
I would say my favorite part of my job is anytime I'm underwater. I really love spending time underwater. Even if it's a coral reef, amazing, or if it's a dark shipwreck, amazing. That's always my favorite. And then I would say, in addition to that, my favorite thing is taking other people underwater and helping them learn the tools that we use in science and underwater. So that is definitely my favorite part of the job. And luckily for me, it's something that happens, I would say, a couple times a week. On a regular basis, then spending time underwater and teaching other people how to do science underwater.
Okay, very cool. And we'll get one more in here. Hailey, would you ever go on another sailing expedition?
Yes, absolutely. This was just like my first little taste, right? It was only 7 days, and some of the legs on the DARWIN200 are 30, 40, maybe even 50 days on our longest one. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity to kind of just see it if I love it. I knew I was going to love it, but definitely I would be very excited to go on another sailing expedition sometime.
All right, excellent. Well, Hailey, thank you so much for being one of our Explorers Club researchers and doing an amazing job on board the ship. It's not always easy, and like you mentioned, your plan to get those debris in the open water, you didn't see a lot of them, so you shifted, like good scientists do. Change plans, be flexible. Expeditions never quite go exactly how you think they're going to go. So thank you so much for everything you did. We look forward to seeing some more of those results.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I look forward to seeing the rest of the expedition.
Awesome. Thanks, Hailey. Have a great rest of the day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
See ya. Okay, very cool. Spending a little time with one of our Explorers Club researchers, Hailey. She is back in Canada, but months and months ago, she was with us in Australia when we sailed from Sydney down to Hobart in Tasmania. So the run of show for the rest of our time together, I am going to play a brand new experiment. And then, of course, the classrooms will have 2 weeks to try that experiment, send us in some pictures with their results, and then we'll have some gift cards for those classrooms. And then I am going to share some photos and stories and videos from my time in Greater Kruger about, I guess, 2 weeks ago now when I was there. So I will share some of that. So let's get that first video playing. Let's take a look at our brand new experiment this week. It should come up on your screen any moment.
Welcome back, everyone. In today's experiment, we're going to make a clock powered by potatoes. Your task is to do this experiment and work out how potato power alone can make an electric current to power a clock. To do this experiment, you need 2 potatoes, a little piece of electrical wire, 2 strips of zinc, but you can also use galvanized nails that are covered in zinc, and 2 strips of copper, but you can also use copper from copper wiring. You can easily strip off the plastic to have two long, thin pieces of copper. And last but not least, you need a small digital clock. These are widely available and very cheap to buy. Then it has its negative and positive connections. First, you need to make a connecting pair. So take your electrical wire and one of the copper strips and very carefully connect the wire to the copper strip. My copper strip has got a hole in it, so I can easily thread it through, but if yours doesn't, you can wrap the wire around it very tightly, making sure that there's a good connection. That's very important for the current to run through. On the other side of the wire, take one of the zinc strips and in a similar way, connect that to the wire. Again, in my case, I've got a hole, but you can easily wrap the wire around it. There we go. And your connecting pair is now ready. It's best to then cover the tops of your connecting pair with a little bit of sticky tape to really make sure that those wires are firmly attached and in contact. So I'm going to put this little bit of tape around the top. There we go. And same on the other side with the copper. We'll put a little bit of tape on that side too. That is firmly pressed down and definitely in contact. Then you need to take the black negative wire from the clock and connect that to the second zinc plate. So I'm just going to do that here and wrap that wire around. That's firmly connected. And I will put a little bit of sticky tape onto the top of that one as well. So that's firmly connected on. There we go, that's firmly connected. And then last but not least, connect the red positive wire from the clock to the last remaining copper plate. Let's do that here and connect that wire to the top of this strip of copper. And we'll also put a little bit of sticky tape on that one to make sure that's firmly attached and definitely well in contact. You're now ready for your clock to be powered by potatoes. Take 2 potatoes and insert your connecting pair first. Insert the zinc strip into one potato, all the way in, and insert the copper strip into the other. Now this is very important you get this the right way round. Place in the second copper strip into the potato that has the zinc strip. So they must have 2 different types of strips in them, not the same. So let's place this one in here. And then last but not least, place the final strip into the second potato. And with a bit of luck, your clock should turn on. And it has, look at that. A clock powered by potatoes. Your task in this experiment is to work out how the potatoes power the clock. Send in your answers to classroom@darwin200.com for a chance to win an Amazon gift voucher prize. Join me next time to find out the answer. Good luck and thanks for watching.
Okay, there we go. That is our experiment for this week. I guess for the next 2 weeks is to try it on your own if you can. You can find kits online for making potato clocks. So it'll get you that little clock, some little wires, and they're not overly expensive. I think you can get one of the kits off Amazon for less than $10 if you do want to try it with your classroom, or if you want to try it at home, that's great too. Take some pictures of your potato clock and send them to classroom@darwin200.com. Do I still have that there? There we go. Classroom@darwin200.com. You can send in those pictures and then we'll have some Amazon gift cards for some lucky classrooms that send us in those pictures. So 2 weeks to try that potato clock experiment. Like I mentioned, you can find those materials somewhere like Amazon and they're relatively inexpensive as well. Okay, I want to spend some time talking about one of the segments of my time in Africa. So I flew out at the beginning of the month, and I went to an area called the Greater Kruger area. So Kruger National Park is kind of up in the north of the country of South Africa. It's a beautiful park, but adjacent along the side of Kruger are a series of private reserves. Some of them are really big, over 60,000 hectares. And these private reserves have little lodges on them. And in the past, there was fences between Kruger and these big private reserves. But years ago, these private reserves decided to drop the fences between Kruger and the reserves, meaning that it overnight vastly increased the size of Kruger National Park, and it allows for the free migration of the animals. So more space, more movement of animals. It's just better for the ecosystems, and it's really done wonders for the health of a lot of species, as well as just the biodiversity in the greater Kruger ecosystem. So I went to Klasiri Private Game Reserve, and that's where I spent my time. And I'd like to share some pictures, some stories, some video clips with you now from that experience. So if you'll just give me a moment here, I will open up these pictures and then we'll get right into it. So you should see them come up onto my screen, or sorry, onto your screen very shortly. And here we go. So let's move this to my other screen so it's not too clunky. There we go. So one thing you might hear about is the Big Five. Okay, the Big Five, it's kind of a hunting term. So the Big Five were termed that because they're the most dangerous animals to hunt in Africa. So we're going to look at the Big Five in just a moment. Now, of course, we don't hunt a lot of those species. Some of them are endangered, they're protected, but that's where that name Big Five came from. Now the Big Five is more of a goal for people who visit places in Africa, is to see them and shoot them in the wild, but with your camera instead. So I was lucky enough to see the Big Five in the wild, which was pretty cool. Here's the first one here. This is the buffalo. So these are the Cape buffalo. They are, well, they're pretty big. We spent a whole day tracking them before we found them. And for animals that are so big, they can be really hard to find. We found a herd of about 300 of them. But like I said, it took several hours for us to track down these buffalo. So here's a couple pictures of some of those buffalo. Another member of the Big Five is our elephant, our beautiful African elephants. They're doing much better in Africa. Their numbers have risen in a lot of areas, risen to the point where some of them have to be moved to different reserves, to different national parks, because they are doing so well and their numbers are growing quickly. So that's really good. And so, yeah, any time spent with these elephants is pretty cool. They move around in their family groups. They're led by the matriarch, the oldest female. And then you can see there's a whole mixture here of different family members and young elephants. You can see two different sizes of those young elephants there, having a drink at a little watering hole. And there's this one, couldn't have been more than a couple weeks old. We have this little baby here making its way across the river with its mother. And then they really enjoy coming down to the river, having a little dip in the river, having a little rub in the mud, which helps kind of protect their skin from things like the sun and parasites. So they do like to roll in the mud too. And then there, that typical elephant, that trunk is such an amazing tool that they have, and they like to spray themselves down with that trunk as well. So that's member two of the Big Five. Then we have our rhinos. So these are South African rhinos. And this is a little baby rhino that I have a couple of pictures of here that we found. Is a cute little guy. And then here is the baby with its mother. And what you might notice is the mother's horns are missing. And that's because in these private reserves, they dehorn the rhinos. So they will tranquilize them. So they go to sleep and then they'll take the horns off. And the reason they do that is because if they didn't, they'd be under threat from being killed by poachers who will take the horn on the black market. In Asian countries, they believe it has medicinal properties. And rhino horn, 1 kilogram of rhino horn can sell for $60,000 US. So you can see why they're threatened. So it's not the best solution to have to take their horns, but it has been effective in limiting the amount of poaching that's going on in some of these reserves. The horn will grow back in 3 years or so, and they'll have to do it again. And then the material is no different than the material in your fingernails and your hair. It's called keratin. So it has no special properties. It's just like your fingernails. It's just like your hair. And it doesn't bother the rhino at all when it's removed. I would say it's similar to when we cut our nails or we cut our hair. It doesn't hurt us. And that's similar to what happens with the horn of the rhino. So the fourth member of our big five is the leopard. And we found this beautiful female leopard up in a tree. And she was eating an impala. So she caught the impala. And then leopards quickly, they're so strong, they drag their prey up into the trees. And then they can eat it nice and slowly. They can take their time. And they don't have to worry about bigger predators like lions or hyenas coming and trying to steal their meal. So they drag it up into the trees. You can see I'm getting this really intense look as I take some pictures of her up there in the tree. And then they're very clean. So the whole time she's cleaning herself to make sure there's no blood smell, because that can scare prey away. So as she eats, she is very concerned about keeping herself really clean so that there's no smells lingering around. So here's a few pictures of her up in the tree. She's finished eating. And then there's her making her way down. So leaping from branch to branch as she makes her way down, very carefully climbing sideways, making her way down to the ground. This is a different leopard. This is a male leopard that we came across, but we only saw him for just a moment, just a quick little glimpse as he was making his way through the bush. And then at night, the leopards hunt as well. So this is a different female leopard. I believe her name was Karula. And we found her making her way through the bush at night, which was kind of cool. So you can see that stare she's giving in the spotlight on the vehicle. So that's the fourth member of the big five. And our last member of the big five is our lions. So they hunt in big groups called prides. Oftentimes the lionesses do most of the hunting because they're a little bit faster. And there's usually more of them in a group. And so we didn't see the lions very active. Most of the times we found them, they were kind of lazing around. They were sleeping. They spend a lot of their day sleeping. One day we found them in the bush and they were all laying with huge swollen bellies because the night before they'd clearly caught something, maybe a zebra, and they ate it. And so they had these big full bellies and they were just relaxing. Well, here's a male one here. You can see his mane. They were just relaxing after all that food they had. And it would probably be another day or two before they kind of digested that huge meal, and then they'd be on the prowl again, looking for more to eat. So you can see them all there laying and resting in the bush. There's probably less than 20,000 wild lions left in Africa. So their numbers have been hurt due to habitat loss, due to revenge killings. You know, as people push further and further in their habitat with their livestock, lions will kill livestock, and then people will take revenge and kill the lions. So our numbers of lions are falling across Africa, which is a scary thing because when you think of Africa, you think of lions. And to realize that there's probably more lions in captivity than there are left in the wilds of Africa is kind of a scary thought. So there we go. That is our big five: the buffalo, the elephant, the rhino, the leopard, and the lion. So I felt pretty fortunate to see all of them in the wild, up close, and just doing their thing, hunting, relaxing, sometimes fighting, interacting with other species. So it was really neat to see the big five in the wild. And there's a shot. Oftentimes the lions will move at night because it's cooler and they can cover longer distances when the weather is a bit cooler. But they're not the only wild cats in Africa. Believe it or not, this looks like a house cat, but this is actually an African wild cat. So it looks very much like a house cat, but it's not domesticated. It's a species that lives in Africa. You can see they've got kind of those beautiful greeny, aquamarine eyes. And so this is a wild cat species, never domesticated, this species, and it lives alongside the leopards and the lions in the Klasiri Game Reserve. Now, there's all kinds of bird life. Africa's a great spot to see birds. I counted probably about 125 new species of birds that I'd never seen before. And one of my favorites to find is owls. So I came across 4 different species of owls while I was in Africa. This is the African barred owlet. So it's just a tiny little owl here. There's a couple pictures of that barred owlet. At night, we could often find them hunting in the roadway. This is an eagle owl, a spotted eagle owl. This one here is a Varouz owl. So they have a really deep kind of booming whoo sound that you can hear right across rivers over large distances. It's got something down there. I can't tell if it's a little mammal or a little bird. So it had clearly caught something. And then this is an African scops owl. So this is another species of owl that we found at night. They like to kind of hunt and sit in the road, the gravel roads that go through the reserve. And so that makes them a little easier to spot while you're driving around. There's all kinds of birds of prey. This is a goshawk. This is an eagle hawk. So as you kind of drive around, you see all of these birds of prey up in the trees looking for things to eat. This is a silhouette shot of what I believe is a tawny eagle. So this was first thing in the morning. It was sitting up in the tree. And then there's also little birds that can be little hunters too. These are called shrikes. And these birds will catch little lizards, maybe little mice, and then they'll stick them up in trees and come and find them and eat them later, which is kind of cool. So this is a species of shrike, and they've got kind of this long tail. There's bee eaters, so they sit in the trees and they catch bees and other insects right out of the air. So these are little African bee eaters. And then there's our hornbills. So I'm sure you've seen Lion King. This would be Zazu, the hornbill. So these birds, these hornbills, are very abundant. You see them all day long as you're going on game drives or hanging out at your lodge. We've got these beautiful lilac-breasted rollers, so beautiful colored birds. And then when they fly, you get even more color. You get these beautiful flashes of blue from their feathers. Baboons. The baboons move all around. They move in big groups. Not so much where I was, but near the cities, near villages and towns. The baboons have even been known to raid people's houses and steal food and other things. Chameleons come out, especially at night. That's when they're the most active and they're out hunting for insects, but you do see them during the day as well. And then leopard tortoises. These guys are so cool. They're so small. They're about maybe the size of a small saucer that maybe you'd have a coffee cup or a teacup on, but they have these beautiful patterns and these beautiful colors on their shells. We know our giraffes in Africa are a pretty iconic species. And then if you look at this picture here, you can see these birds all over them. They're called oxpeckers. And these birds have a symbiotic relationship with mammals in Africa. They will hop around on their bodies, could be buffaloes or impala or giraffes, elephants, rhinos. And they hop around on their bodies and they eat little bugs, little ticks and insects. So they kind of clean parasites and things off of the giraffes and other mammals. And so they get a meal. And the giraffes and other mammals get their skin cleaned. So it's a kind of a win-win relationship for both. Although the oxpeckers can be kind of annoying when they're pecking around the animals' noses or eyes. So sometimes the giraffes, the rhinos, the buffaloes get a little bit annoyed by the oxpeckers. But on a whole, they do a really good job keeping them nice and clean. We have our impala. This is the time of the season where the males start to practice fighting, because pretty soon they will be having real fights for females and for territories and things like that. So these two males are kind of just getting warmed up. It's kind of more play fighting before things get more serious in the coming weeks. There's another shot of the impala. Impalas are super numerous in the area because they're a real important food source. If you look at their bums, they have kind of an M shape in black fur. And so they're called McDonald's or fast food because they're such an important food source for so many predators. And there's so many of them. They're very abundant out in the bush. Here's another little predator. This guy is a jackal, so more of a scavenger. Will kind of lurk around a kill that maybe a lion or some wild dogs made, and it'll try to get in on some of those scraps, those leftover bits. These are kudu. Kudu are a big antelope species. Here's a male one to give you an idea of these big horns that they have, but they are quite large. I believe they're the one of the largest of the antelope species, the kudu. We've got little vervet monkeys that you can find running and playing and wrestling in the bush. So as you can see, there is a ton of biodiversity. We have our warthogs. These are 2 baby warthogs that were around a watering hole. So you can see the mother there with her big tusks. Warthogs are pretty tough. You don't want to get in front of a warthog. They can run you right over, and they've got those big tusks, which will leave a mark as well for sure. So there's a closer look at those tusks of the mother, the female warthog. But my favorite, my absolute favorite, are the wild dogs. There are only 4,000 wild dogs left in Africa. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as painted wolves, and that might be the new name in the future. It might change from African wild dogs to painted wolves. You can see why they get that name, painted wolves. We found a pack of about a dozen of them that we followed over a few days, and they are just beautiful. Super successful hunters. So a lion might be successful 40% of the time on a hunt. Wild dogs are successful 90% of the time. They hunt as a pack. They have really good stamina, so they can outlast faster animals, which get tired quickly. And so they are very, very good hunters, these African wild dogs. You can see that they're very social and very interactive. They may spend a lot of the day resting and harder to find in the bush, but when they turn on and go into hunt mode, so here's one resting here in the bush, they are very good pack hunters, very successful at catching their prey and finding what they need. And so just a few more pictures. This is the whole group here. This is a dozen wild dogs, and they're on the move, hunting here, actively looking for something. The last few pictures here, here's a wildebeest, which I'm sure you've seen in many movies like The Lion King. And finally, we have our iconic zebra. So this beautiful pattern that's believed to kind of be able to confuse predators in the long grass. So here's a couple of pictures of some zebra to wrap up some of these photos. And the last thing I want to share with you is just a couple of video clips to show you what it is like being out in the bush. So let me share my screen. Whoops, that's the wrong button. Let me try that one more time here for you, and we'll do some videos. So you're in a game vehicle. Here is what that game vehicle looks like. It's an open safari vehicle with seats in the back. There's a driver, and then there's a tracker on the front who sits in a seat. He's looking for footprints and signs of wildlife. Our guide is there driving, and he can tell us a lot about what we're seeing. So sometimes we're driving in the bush. Sometimes we have to drive across rivers, like we're about to drive across this river here to get to the other side. You can see this is right first thing in the morning, the sun just starting to rise here. So it's beautiful colors. And we're getting started here on this drive, crossing over the river. So Pierre is the game driver here. And then on the front, our tracker is Bisu. Oh, sorry, Uzi. Uzi is our driver, our tracker that day. All right, so we'll take a look at another clip here. You never know what you're going to find. You can't kind of control nature. So around any corner, you could find something like a group of giraffe, like we've just found here. And then we've got this little herd of zebra here blocking our path. So you kind of go through the bush. You're looking for footprints. You're looking for animal signs. But you never know what you're going to find around any given corner. Like this was a pretty good little spot here as we came around the corner and found this group of giraffes and zebras sticking together as they look for food in the bush. And then it's also a safety thing. You know, the bigger numbers that they're in, it's more likely that someone will detect a predator and be able to warn the group that there is a predator in the area.
just staring, trying to figure out what's happening.
So we go out during the day, but we also go out at night. So this is what it's like at night. So you're driving in the game vehicle. You can see Woosie here at the front. He's got his spotlight. And then again, you come across wildlife at night. So these are impala. This is a herd of impala. And they're out in the open here on an airstrip.
Yeah.
So this is a clearing where a small plane could land. And the reason they're on this open area is at night. It's easier to spot predators. And predators, believe you me, they love to be out at night. It's a good time to ambush their prey, like this leopard here that we found hunting at night. So the animals are very used to humans driving around. You know, humans have been driving through these areas for decades. And so they don't even look at the cars anymore. They've realized that the cars, the people in the cars, don't mean them any harm. So they pretty much just treat the cars like they're just part of the environment. They just go about their business and totally ignore us driving around in these game vehicles. But it's really cool to see the animals at night, like that leopard. And the last clip I want to show you is some really cool interaction. So this is a group of wild dogs that were eating what was left of an impala, and then some hyenas came to try and steal the kill. So you can see these two big hyenas have come in and they're trying to drag away what's left of the impala. And the wild dogs, who had already eaten a couple times that day, they weren't super concerned, but they did like to mess around and kind of sneak up and bite the hyenas from behind. And eventually they were able to steal the rest of the kill back from the hyenas because there were more wild dogs. You can hear some crunching from the hyenas, crunching through the bones. And then the wild dogs kind of bouncing around, looking for their chance to steal the impala back. So really neat to be able to be there out in the wild and to see some of these interactions happening. To see the wild dogs catch an impala, to see the hyenas try to steal the impala. Yeah, just an amazing time to see that ecosystem in Africa, in Kasiri, in the Greater Kruger region. Very special. An amazing week spent out there in the bush. And a huge shout out to the guides and to the trackers who work so hard to teach people about the animals, who respect and keep their distance from the animals, and who are so good at reading the environment and finding the wildlife, because it's not always easy. Okay, well, that's what I want to share with you today, give you kind of a little taste of what it was like to be in that region of Africa in the bush. Next week, we have another guest speaker joining us, but I will also share from our time down in Hans Bay on the coast, where we were looking for sharks and African penguins. We were doing live events from the field, so I'll share some of that with you next week. The last thing we have to do for today is we have a brand new Curiosity of the Week. So I'm going to play that for you now.
Welcome back, everyone. For this week's Curiosity, I have these 4 strange objects here. What do you think these are? If you look closely, each one is a different shape and a different colour and has a slightly different pattern on it. They're very irregular, but they're slightly see-through and they're very hard. Definitely a mineral. Can you work out what these are? Send in your best guess to classroom@darwin200.com for a chance to win an Amazon gift voucher prize. Good luck and thank you for taking part.
Okay, so there we go. That is our Curiosity of the Week. Classroom@darwin200.com. Stu gave you a pretty good clue that it is a mineral. So do a little bit of research, send in your best guess to classroom@darwin200.com. You have 1 week for your curiosity answer, 2 weeks to try the experiment and send us in some photos, and then we'll have some prizes for classrooms that do that for us. So we're going to wrap up right on time today, right at 10 o'clock Eastern. Thanks for spending a little time with us. I hope you enjoyed meeting Hailey, our researcher from the Explorers Club, on board from Sydney to Hobart. I hope you enjoyed some of those photos and videos from the Kasiri region, Greater Kruger region in South Africa. And we hope to see you next week. We've got another guest speaker. We'll hopefully have a live uplink from the ship once we get the Starlink up and running again. But in the meantime, I want to finish off as we always do with a shout out to our sponsors, supporters, and partners, without whom we wouldn't be sailing around the world, doing the world's most exciting classroom, bringing young leaders out to work with conservation groups, or having researchers like Hailey come on board to do things like debris and edNA research. So thanks for hanging out with us today. We're going to sign off on episode 79 of the world's most exciting classroom. And we'll see you again next week, Thursday, 9 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock in the UK. Thanks, everyone.